What if I told you that every MMORPG launch does not have to be this bad?
The substance of legends.
The pulse of adventure.
That games may have already potentially solved or at least mitigated some of these major issues that are endlessly frustrating when the launches happen. Things that make us want to pull our hair out or be angry on Steam reviews and Twitter, and sometimes YouTube comments. And not only are some games already using these, but new ones that are in development like Pantheon Rise of the Fallen may already be thinking about implementing them long before it's time for them to. If you've ever been part of an MMO launch or a new server launch, like say Everquest progression servers, you've likely experienced the crush of player queues or the complete lack of things to do because there's just too many players, all concentrated in one area. And when these have become truly unmanageable, the normal method for most games has been spin up a new server. But this, as we all know, causes several problems, and problems that echo for long after those server queues have gone away. First and foremost, MMOs are social. And at this point, there are often groups of friends that will be trying to play new games or new servers together. When servers get full, new servers are created and old full servers are locked, friends get separated, guilds get split apart. They may have to transfer, create new characters, or just give in and play alone. None of those options are ideal. This seems like the kind of problem that will be solved with mega servers or login server choices like Elder Scrolls and BDO respectively. But as recently as New World's launch in 2021, we were faced with this recurring problem. I was in fact in a guild that had a second guild on another server, an overflow server, because you just couldn't play together. But these problems seem to spiral because server imbalances in population keep going. Depending on how the game works and how dependent on population they are, it causes long-lasting issues. Servers added later may suffer from having too few players, even early on. Players added from the beginning may be crushed under the weight of the initial population who are unwilling to leave, facing queues, spawn scarcity, and an overwhelmed economy. These problems are generally temporary, but that leads to its own issues because once the novelty wears off, the depopulation begins. Players flee in massive numbers for various reasons. They didn't like the game, they got frustrated with the server issues, they went back to a game they had been playing before, or their friends quit, or some combination of those things. The initial drop can sometimes be immense, which leaves a brand new game with dead servers, initiating a messy process of merging these servers. Doing so can be an absolute mess, even when companies are somewhat prepared to create and merge servers quickly, as seen by New World. For all the issues with New World's launch, I was surprised by how they tried to handle it, by quickly making new servers and adding in free character transfers to help when the servers inevitably started to die. The natural answer here is to just make the server size larger, right? One of the issues with New World was seemingly the tiny server size that they had, and they had to increase it a few times during their launch. But with larger servers comes a larger concentration of players in the same starting areas. Everquest experienced this with their progression servers for several cycles. Newbie zones were both a sight to see and an utter f***ing nightmare. As players outnumbered spawns, leveling early on was painfully slow, even more so than usual. A healthy level of competition for spawns in an MMO can be absolutely great, but when you're left there just sitting and waiting and fights break out over freaking fire beetles, well, there's kind of a problem. But Everquest, World of Warcraft, and more recently Diablo 4, and now Pantheon, seem to have figured out a way to solve this problem. And Pantheon's might be the best way yet that preserves an authentic, unaltered world while skillfully handling the initial influx, or at least what they are presenting. Because out of these games, 2 of them have not launched yet, and Pantheon is the one that is the furthest off. So what is this magical cure for this overpopulation? Instancing. And wait, before you go, no, I am not talking about World of Warcraft's instance dungeons or Everquest instance raids. I'm talking about something a little bit different. Sometimes referred to as phasing, layering, or picks, It's the ability to create an entire zone or localized areas when they reach a threshold for population. Diablo 4 is currently using this in the way they maintain the fear of the game, while also adding in some MMO-light elements by creating new phases where they reach a set threshold. But those thresholds are set below the minimum requirements to sustain the zones. What they're choosing to do is limit population in certain areas while also having it all be open, thus creating this ambiance of you can still die.
I need more time.
Oh no! In Everquest, they solved the problem with overcrowding in newbie zones by adding in a pick function, which allowed you to pick a populated zone instance. In a game like Everquest that relies very heavily on large open zones, this was a massive sea change in how the game handled things. But it also alleviated the huge population issues in early zones or extremely popular zones while allowing the world to still feel plenty dangerous and lived in. Picks in Everquest are mostly manual, though when they reach a certain threshold, you are not able to load into that pick or transfer into it. At times during the development of this technology, this created issues, mostly with raids, as players would be separated across different picks until a new pick opened that could accommodate the raid. They have also refined this to close picks when they do not have enough population, because early on you actually had entire huge zones with 1 to 2 players in them, because the pick would just stay open as long as someone was there. That is no longer the case. World of Warcraft has actually taken this a step further by proactively using different technologies throughout their game. We need to talk about 3 distinct features that are all kind of interwoven: phasing, sharding, and layering. Phasing is the simplest, as this has to do with story beats. It's been around for a long time in World of Warcraft. It changes the outdoor world based on how you progress. Perhaps the most pertinent example for this, for me personally, is in Wrath of the Lich King with the Evenhold, or Evenhold. I don't know, you tell me which one it is down below. Which went through changes as you progressed your personal story. Phasing has been used extensively in World of Warcraft, adding in the ability to change terrain in Cataclysm, allowing the world to change for you or with you without massive patches. Sharding is very different, and it's tied to population. It's more similar to the pick feature in Everquest. Like the pick tool in EQ, this is to prevent overcrowding in certain areas. When too many players are in a given area, a new shard is automatically created, essentially a copy of that area. Players who enter that overcrowded area now enter into the new shard instead of the overcrowded version. Unlike Everquest though, where the process of picks can be very manual, in World of Warcraft, you're not supposed to notice this at all, and there is no option to change between shards. It just happens in the background. Layering is sharding on steroids. It affects the entire realm or server and was used with World of Warcraft Classic. This is a very interesting way to tackle server load at launch, because the way I was understanding it, it's almost like a separate server in the traditional sense, but within the same server, because you could change over to a different layer by joining a party. This alleviates one of the major problems with spinning up multiple servers, being unable to play with your friends. In a lot of ways, it sounds not dissimilar from how in Final Fantasy XIV you can transfer over to another server on the same realm. But in that case, again, it is manual. Whereas in the World of Warcraft case, it is just done behind the scenes and you're not really supposed to even notice it. This brings us to Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen, a game mentioned at the outset. I wanted to highlight this game because while it is still in pre-alpha, they're already thinking of how to deal with this issue and doing it in a way that sounds a lot like what Everquest and World of Warcraft have done, but on a temporary basis. In the March episode of Parting the Veil, the creative director of Pantheon talked about layering and instancing in a larger discussion on Pantheon's open world, and what was discussed sounded a bit closer to WoW's version that is currently in use than Everquest's, but on a much more temporary basis.
I mean, I'll even go as far to say that I think for a lot of people, their interest in Pantheon to some degree involved an emancipation from instancing. Is in Pantheon's launch period, when Pantheon launches, and as with any new MMORPG, it is inundated with people. You inevitably have overcrowding issues. some games, some studios decide to handle that by spinning up lots and lots of additional servers to provide other places for players to filter into. I think personally that is a bad move. What I think is the smarter move is to, for a limited period of time during that launch period, to allow for a sharding instancing situation with zones. So if you've got 1,000 players trying to log onto the same server, then you spool up 10, 15, 20 different instances of Thronefast until that population goes down.
Joppa, and by extension the team creating Pantheon, are obviously aware of how MMO launches go. The twofold issue of server and zone crowding, followed by the precipitous drop-off that creates cascading problems for MMOs that further push players away. It is one of those things that you have to be ready and be on top of, or you're left kind of scrambling and trying to fix it. And honestly, players now in general are not very forgiving. We have a ton of options of what we can play, and a game that is not fun at launch is going to struggle because we're going to give up on it, unless you're run a content creation channel and you have to keep playing the game to at least get 30 something hours in it for first impressions. Not that I've experienced that and somehow put over 140 freaking hours into New World. I should make more videos on that. But if you can be prepared, and thinking about it this early for Pantheon in their development cycle is a good sign, it can effectively solve the problems faced by games all over, especially if you know that you might have low server caps, because you do not have to rely on clunky things like server transfers. Whether they're free or paid, they always are disruptive, and the inevitable merging of servers is never a good headline. It just doesn't work very well in the press. Spinning up servers may sound good, but closing them 2 months later, not as great. But why focus on Pantheon? Well, because I want to talk about the temporary nature of what they were saying. Because Pantheon is a classically inspired game, games like Everquest are big in how it's being built. And so players that are interested in a game like Pantheon are naturally kind of averse to instancing, because they saw games like World of Warcraft take it a bit too far. So they have talked about instancing in very limited fashion. And specifically in this part with these, bigger areas, it's talk about a temporary solution as players spread out into the world. The beginning of the game or server launches, those kind of things. When you have large, unnatural concentrations of players in a single area. And being willing to pivot like that, I think, is a great thing to kind of deal with the problem without sacrificing what the game is trying to put out. Now, they did also talk about other types of instancing, like in certain areas, like little boss fights and things like that. But it still seems like for the most part, Pantheon is going to be very limited on how they instance. But they're not letting those limits on instancing prevent them from actually tackling this very real problem that almost every MMO is going to face. They're embracing this technology to deal with a pain point, which I wish more MMOs would do. Every MMO should be embracing technology that can alleviate some of these technical pain points that happen temporarily in an MMO. Launches in MMOs tend to be a struggle in a lot of ways, between the server queues, the overpopulation, and then just being unable to handle it. Because there is no other point in the MMO where you're going to have the same number of people trying the same areas all at once. The games themselves are not made to have everyone in one spot, and it always shows. And I hope that many gaming companies will take the same approach that Pantheon is and look at what other games have done well. What has worked for them? What kind of things did they do that helped alleviate this? And consider it early. Consider how they're going to deal with it. In pre-alpha, in alpha, in beta testing, have an answer for the server problem before the server problem happens. If World of Warcraft killed the MMO genre for a decade, as I put in this video here, then perhaps for the next, their use of technology and phasing and layering could actually save the next generation of an MMO. The same technology that they use to make a world feel full, but not overcrowded. My name is Redbeard Flynn. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.